The airport hummed with life, a symphony of intercom announcements, hurried footsteps, and the distant roar of jet engines. 8-year-old Timothy Miller clutched his visitor badge, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in his surroundings. His heart pounded with excitement. This was a dream come true. He had spent weeks looking forward to this day, ever since his father had told him about the special behind-the-scenes tour at Horizon Airlines. Timothy's love for aviation wasn't just a passing childhood fascination. It was woven into the very fabric of his being. Every book he read, every show he watched, and every conversation he had seemed to revolve around planes, pilots, and the art of flying. It wasn't just about the machines. It was about what they represented: freedom, adventure, possibility. His mother had once dreamed of being a pilot. She had studied hard, trained relentlessly, and had come so close to achieving that goal before life had other plans. Cancer had stolen her dreams before she could reach the cockpit, but not before she made Timothy promise one thing: to never stop chasing the sky. It was a promise he held onto with everything in him. Today was special, not only because he was getting to see the inner workings of an airline, but because today marked 2 years since his mother's passing. Instead of spending the day mourning, his father had arranged this visit as a tribute to her memory. Timothy knew she would have loved this. He had arrived at the airport with his father that morning, dressed in his best outfit, a navy blue button-down shirt and khaki pants. He had carefully pinned his mother's old pilot wing brooch to his shirt, the one she used to wear when she studied for her flight exams. It was his way of keeping her close. "Ready for takeoff, Captain Timothy?" His father, Robert Miller, had asked with a smile, adjusting the boy's collar before they left home. "Yes, sir," Timothy had responded with a sharp salute, his eyes alight with determination. Robert had driven him to the airport, offering small bits of aviation trivia along the way, answering every question Timothy threw at him with the patience of a man who understood his son's passion. But while Timothy was brimming with excitement, Robert himself was battling something far heavier, a secret he hadn't yet told his son. His heart surgery was scheduled for next week. The thought weighed on him, but he didn't let it show. Today was about Timothy, about making sure he had a memory he would cherish forever. So he had arranged everything down to the smallest detail. Tanya Reynolds from Human Resources had been put in charge of the tour, ensuring Timothy would be safe and well cared for while Robert attended back-to-back meetings. When they arrived at the terminal, Tanya greeted Timothy with a warm smile. "You must be our special guest today," she said, holding out a hand. "I hope you're ready to see some cool stuff." Timothy shook her hand eagerly. "Yes, Mom. I'm so excited." Robert ruffled his son's hair. "I'll see you soon, buddy. Listen to Ms. Reynolds, okay?" "I will, Dad." Robert watched them walk off, unaware that in just a few hours, his son's innocent excitement would turn into fear, and his own position of power would be called upon in ways he never expected. Timothy followed Tanya through the airport, soaking in every detail. The polished floors reflected the overhead lights, and the scent of coffee and jet fuel filled the air. He could barely contain himself as he passed by large glass windows, watching planes taxi down the runway. Eventually, they'd reached the pilot's lounge, a restricted area reserved for Horizon Airlines crew. It was a quiet space, designed to allow pilots and flight attendants to rest between flights. Large windows provided a stunning view of the tarmac, and plush chairs were scattered around. "All right, Timothy," Tanya said, checking her watch. "I need to step out for a quick meeting. You can wait here, but don't wander off, okay?" Timothy nodded obediently, taking a seat near the window. He wasn't going anywhere. This was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and he wasn't going to mess it up. Minutes passed as he admired the view, watching planes take off and land, imagining himself in the cockpit one day. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a sharp voice cut through the air like a whip. "What do you think you're doing here?" Timothy turned sharply, his heart skipping a beat. A tall woman with short blonde hair and an authoritative presence loomed over him, her piercing blue eyes filled with suspicion. She was wearing a Horizon Airlines captain's uniform, her name badge reading Captain Karen Williams. I'm waiting for Ms. Reynolds," Timothy stammered, holding up his badge. "She gave me this." Karen snatched the badge from his hands before he could finish. She inspected it, her lips curling into a sneer. "This is fake." "No, Mom, it's real. Ms. Reynolds gave it to me," Timothy protested, his voice shaking. Karen's gaze hardened. "I don't know how you got in here, but this is a restricted area. Unauthorized access is a major security breach." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling security." Timothy's eyes widened in horror. "Please, I can call my dad." "Oh, I'm sure your father is going to be very helpful," she said sarcastically, crossing her arms. "What is he? A janitor? A baggage handler?" Timothy swallowed hard. He's Robert Miller." Karen scoffed. "Robert Miller." She let out a bitter laugh. "Nice try, kid. The FAA administrator. Right. And I suppose your mother is an astronaut." Tears welled up in Timothy's eyes as he tried to protest, but Karen was already dialing security. Within moments, 2 uniformed guards entered the room. "This child was caught in a restricted area," Karen informed them. "He needs to be removed immediately." The guards hesitated. The boy didn't look like a troublemaker. He looked scared. "Ma'am, maybe we should confirm," one of them started. "There's nothing to confirm," Karen snapped. "He's trespassing." One of the guards knelt down to Timothy's level. "Hey, kid, do you have someone we can call?" Timothy sniffled, reaching into his pocket with trembling fingers. "My dad." Karen rolled her eyes as he shakily dialed a number. She couldn't believe the audacity. Did this kid really expect her to believe he was connected to Robert Miller, one of the most powerful men in the aviation industry? She had worked for Horizon Airlines for 20 years, clawed her way to the top, and never once had she heard of this child. The phone rang once, twice. Then a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Timothy, what's wrong?" Karen froze. Timothy let out a shaky breath. "Dad, I need you." For a moment, there was silence. Then Robert Miller's voice turned cold. "Where are you?" "The pilot's lounge," Timothy whispered. Karen's heart pounded as the voice on the line grew sharper. "Put whoever is in charge on the phone. Now." Karen's mouth went dry. The guards exchanged wary glances. Timothy slowly held up the phone to her. "Captain Williams," one of the guards said cautiously, "I think you should take this." Karen hesitated, then grabbed the phone, pressing it to her ear. "This is Captain Karen Williams," she said stiffly. The voice on the other end turned to steel. "This is Robert Miller, and you just made the biggest mistake of your career." Karen Williams had been a pilot long enough to know the weight of a mistake. A single miscalculation, a moment of lost focus, and everything could go spiraling out of control. But as she stood there, gripping the phone in her hand, she realized that this wasn't just a mistake, it was a disaster. The voice on the other end of the line was unmistakable. Robert Miller. The Robert Miller. Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. The man who had more power in the aviation industry than anyone she had ever met. And she had just accused his son of trespassing. For the first time in years, Karen felt an icy grip of panic wrap around her. "Captain Williams," Robert's voice came again, slow and measured, but carrying an authority that made her stomach drop. "I'm going to ask this once. What exactly have you done to my son?" Karen swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. She glanced at Timothy, who was still sniffling, looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes. The 2 security guards were watching her carefully, waiting for her response. I found an unauthorized minor in the pilot's lounge," she said, forcing herself to maintain composure. "Security protocol dictates." Robert cut her off. "Did you bother to check with Tanya Reynolds before calling security?" Karen felt a flicker of embarrassment. She hadn't. She had made a snap judgment, assuming the worst. And now, that snap judgment was unraveling everything she had worked for. "Sir, you humiliated my son," Robert said, his voice dropping into something even more dangerous, calm fury. "You accused him of forging a visitor's badge. You belittled him. And now you're trying to justify it." Karen clenched her jaw. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she was just doing her job, but she knew there was no excuse. She had handled this all wrong. "Where are you right now?" Robert asked. "In the pilot's lounge," Karen admitted. "Good. Stay there. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Karen exhaled shakily, lowering the phone. She could feel the eyes of the security guards on her, their postures tense. Even they seemed to realize that something monumental was about to happen. One of them cleared his throat. Captain Williams, should we escort the boy somewhere else?" Karen hesitated, but before she could answer, Timothy spoke up, his voice still small but steady. "I just wanted to see the planes." His words cut through her like a blade. She had been so quick to assume he was up to no good, but he was just a child who loved aviation, who probably knew more about planes at 8 years old than most adults did. Karen felt an unfamiliar sting of guilt. "No," she said finally, her voice quieter than before. "Let him stay." The minutes stretched on painfully as they waited. Karen found herself unable to meet Timothy's gaze, but she could feel his presence beside her, his small frame tense. She didn't know much about Robert's personal life, only that he had once been married, and that his wife had passed away. But she never knew he had a son. It was odd, really. For all the times their paths had crossed professionally, she had never once heard him mention Timothy. And now she was about to come face to face with him after years of silence, under the worst possible circumstances. The door to the lounge suddenly burst open. Robert Miller strode in, his presence commanding the entire room without him needing to say a word. His crisp suit, usually worn with ease, looked slightly ruffled, as if he had left in a hurry. His dark eyes locked onto Timothy first, softening slightly as he saw his son was unharmed. Then they shifted to Karen, and the softness disappeared. Karen had never been intimidated by anyone in her life, but right now, standing under Robert Miller's cold, calculating gaze, she felt utterly exposed. "Timothy," Robert said, ignoring everyone else. "Come here." Timothy didn't hesitate. He ran into his father's arms, pressing his face against Robert's chest as his father's hands gently rested on his back. Karen could hear the steady, controlled breaths Robert took, trying to calm himself. Then he looked up. "Captain Williams," he said evenly. Karen straightened. "Sir." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Then Robert spoke again, his voice like ice. "I want an explanation." Karen forced herself to keep her tone professional. "I saw an unaccompanied minor in a restricted area. Security protocol states." "I don't give a damn about protocol," Robert snapped, and for the first time, she saw the real anger burning beneath his controlled demeanor. "What I care about is that you treated my son like a criminal when he did nothing wrong." Karen bit the inside of her cheek. I thought his badge was fake." "Did you check?" Karen hesitated. "No, sir." Robert exhaled sharply, running a hand down his face. "You didn't check. You didn't ask questions. You just assumed." He shook his head. "And not just that. You insulted me." Karen blinked. "What?" "My son told you who his father was," Robert said coldly. "And you laughed. You belittled him. You thought he was lying." Karen felt heat rise to her face. She had, in fact, done exactly that. "I made a mistake," she admitted, the words foreign in her mouth. Robert let out a humorless laugh. "A mistake? That's what you call this?" He looked at Timothy, then back at Karen. "Tell me something, Captain Williams. Would you have reacted the same way if it had been another child?" Or was it something about my son in particular that made you assume he didn't belong here?" Karen stiffened. She knew exactly what he was implying, and she hated that she couldn't answer. Robert didn't let her. "Effective immediately, I want a full review of how this situation was handled," he said, turning to the security guards. "I want statements from every witness. And if I find out that this was more than just an overreaction, if I find out that my son was treated this way because of something deeper, there will be consequences." One of the security guards nodded quickly. "Understood, sir." Karen clenched her fists at her sides. She wanted to defend herself, to insist that she wasn't biased, that she had simply been doing her job. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. She had let her own past, her own paranoia, dictate her actions. And now, she was paying the price. Robert looked at her one last time, his expression unreadable. "I once thought you were the best pilot Horizon Airlines had," he said quietly. "Now, I see you're just someone who lets fear cloud her judgment." The words stung more than she expected. Then, without another glance, he turned and walked out, Timothy's small hand gripping his. Karen stood frozen, watching them go, feeling an unfamiliar weight settle in her chest. For the first time in her career, she wasn't sure if she would recover from this mistake. The drive home was quiet, but the silence was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Timothy sat in the back seat, staring out the window, his small fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the glass. Robert could see his son's reflection in the rearview mirror, and the sight made his chest tighten. The excitement that had once lit up Timothy's face had been replaced with something else, something Robert hadn't seen in him before. Disappointment. Not disappointment in the tour being cut short, not even disappointment in the way Karen Williams had treated him. Disappointment in himself. Robert clenched the steering wheel a little tighter. He had spent years trying to shield Timothy from the uglier sides of the world. He had fought to ensure that his son would never have to feel small, that he would never question his own worth. But today, in that lounge, Robert had seen it happen in real time. His son had been made to feel like he didn't belong. Robert inhaled slowly, keeping his emotions in check. He had spent the majority of his career making high-stakes decisions, but none had ever felt as urgent as what he needed to do next. "Tim," he finally said, breaking the silence. Timothy's gaze shifted toward him in the mirror, but he didn't speak. Robert kept his voice calm. "Talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours?" Timothy hesitated before answering, his voice barely above a whisper. "She thought I didn't belong there." Robert's grip on the wheel tightened. She was wrong. Timothy nodded slightly, but the doubt in his eyes didn't fade. But what if she wasn't? Robert's heart ached at the words. He pulled into their driveway, shifted the car into park, and turned around to face his son properly. "Timothy," he said firmly, "you belong anywhere your passion takes you. You love aviation. You belong in that pilot's lounge just as much as anyone else. Do you hear me?" Timothy nodded again, but this time, it seemed more out of obligation than belief. Robert exhaled slowly. He needed to do more than just say the words. He needed to show Timothy that his dreams weren't just valid. They were unstoppable. That night, after dinner, Robert sat in his home office, reviewing the reports from the incident at the airport. Statements had already started coming in from the security guards, from Tanya Reynolds, and from a few other pilots who had witnessed the altercation. Each account only confirmed what Robert already knew. Karen Williams had acted out of bias and assumption. A mistake, she had called it. Robert had seen many mistakes in his time. But this one was different. Just as he was about to shut down his computer for the night, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID. Horizon Airlines. His jaw tensed as he answered. "Miller." A familiar voice came through the line. David Henshaw, the CEO of Horizon Airlines. "Robert," David said, his voice laced with careful neutrality. "I heard about what happened today." "I'm sure you did," Robert said coolly. "You're calling to do damage control, I assume." David sighed. Look, I won't make excuses for Karen. What she did was out of line. But you and I both know she's one of the best pilots we've got. Being a great pilot doesn't make her a great person, Robert shot back. David was silent for a moment. You want her fired? Robert leaned back in his chair, considering the question. Did he want her fired? A part of him did. A part of him wanted her to feel the weight of the humiliation she had put his son through. But another part of him, one that had spent decades navigating power dynamics and bureaucracy, knew that this wasn't just about one pilot's career. It was about something much bigger. I don't want her fired, Robert said finally. I want her to learn. David sounded surprised. Learn? Yes, Robert said, his mind already working through the details. I want her to be held accountable. I want her to understand exactly why what she did was wrong. And more importantly, I want her to see that the future of aviation doesn't belong to people like her. It belongs to people like Timothy. David hesitated. So, what are you asking for? Robert smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. I want Karen Williams to personally mentor Timothy, he said, for the next 6 months. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You're joking. I'm not. Robert, she just humiliated your son, and now you want her to mentor him. Yes, Robert said. Because if she's going to learn just how wrong she was, she needs to see firsthand what he's capable of. David exhaled sharply. You realize she's going to fight this, right? She won't have a choice, Robert said simply. Not if she wants to keep her job. Another pause. Then, David let out a low chuckle. You always know how to make a point, don't you? I don't make points, Robert said. I make change. The next morning, Karen Williams walked into her office with a headache. She had barely slept, replaying the events from the previous day over and over in her mind. She had made a mistake, a big one. And now she was just waiting for the consequences to fall. She didn't have to wait long. A knock at her door made her look up, and she straightened when she saw David Henshaw standing there, arms crossed. Captain Williams, he said smoothly, we need to talk. Karen nodded, already bracing herself. I figured as much. David stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I won't waste time. Robert Miller isn't pushing for your termination. Karen blinked in surprise. He's not. No, David said, his expression unreadable. But he is pushing for something else. He slid a folder across her desk. Karen opened it, scanning the contents. The more she read, the more her stomach twisted. This has to be a joke, she said, looking up. It's not, David said. If you want to keep your position, you'll agree to it. Karen swallowed hard. 6 months. 6 months of mentoring Timothy Miller. 6 months of working closely with the boy she had wrongly accused, teaching him everything she knew about aviation. It was a punishment wrapped in a lesson. And the worst part, Karen had no choice but to accept. Karen Williams had never backed down from a challenge in her life. She had worked twice as hard as her male counterparts to earn her captain's seat. She had fought through turbulence, both in the skies and in her career. But this was something she wasn't prepared for. She sat stiffly in the training room, a forced smile on her lips as Timothy Miller bounced on his heels, clearly thrilled to be there. His enthusiasm was almost contagious. Almost. Are you excited? Tanya Reynolds asked the boy, kneeling down to his level. You'll be getting lessons from one of the best pilots in the industry. Karen felt a twinge of guilt at the statement. She didn't deserve the title, not after what she had done. She knew this wasn't about teaching Timothy. It was about redemption. It was about proving to Robert Miller, to Horizon Airlines, and to herself that she could be better. Timothy nodded eagerly, clutching a small notebook to his chest. I've been reading about different aircraft models all night. Do you think I'll get to sit in a real cockpit today? Karen hesitated. She had spent the past 2 decades ensuring that only those who belonged in a cockpit got access to it. And if she was being brutally honest, A part of her still struggled to see Timothy in that space. But she had already misjudged the boy once. She wasn't about to do it again. "We'll see," she said, her voice measured. "But first, we need to start with the basics." She gestured to the simulator, a high-tech replica of an actual cockpit. "Come on, let's get started." Timothy's face lit up as he hurried over, barely able to contain his excitement. Karen sighed and followed. This was going to be a long 6 months. The first few weeks were rough. Karen had expected Timothy to be intelligent, but she hadn't expected him to be so quick. The boy soaked up information like a sponge. Every detail she threw at him. Altitudes, airspeeds, emergency procedures. He absorbed without hesitation. And it annoyed her. Not because she didn't want him to succeed, but because his passion reminded her too much of herself when she was younger. She saw her own determination reflected in his eyes, and it unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. But what frustrated her most was how easily Timothy forgave. If he harbored any resentment toward her, he didn't show it. He was always polite, always eager, always willing to learn. It made Karen uncomfortable. One day, after a particularly successful simulator session, Timothy turned to her with a bright grin. "This was amazing." "Thank you, Captain Williams." Karen stared at him, unsure how to respond. She had spent years in the cockpit, commanding crews and flying passengers across the world. Praise from senior pilots, from airline executives, from passengers. She had heard it all before. But hearing gratitude from this child, a child she had wronged, she didn't know what to do with it. So she simply nodded. "You did well today." Timothy beamed. "Does this mean I can sit in a real cockpit now?" Karen hesitated, but then sighed. "Come on." Timothy's eyes widened. "Really?" Karen nodded. "But just to look. No touching anything." Timothy practically skipped alongside her as she led him to one of the parked aircrafts. As they stepped inside, Karen saw the way his eyes filled with awe. He didn't speak for a moment. He simply took it all in. The control panels, the screens, the endless buttons and switches. Then softly, he whispered, "My mom would have loved this." Karen stiffened. Timothy ran a finger along one of the instruments. She wanted to be a pilot before she got sick. Karen swallowed hard. She had read about Sarah Miller. She had seen the name in the reports, but she had never asked Timothy about her. "She sounds like she was a great woman," Karen said carefully. Timothy nodded. "She was. She used to say that the sky was the closest place to heaven." Karen felt something crack inside her. For the first time, she didn't see Timothy as just a child who had wandered into a restricted area. She saw him for who he really was, a boy chasing his mother's dream. A boy who carried grief, but refused to let it hold him down. She exhaled slowly. "You know, when I first started flying, I was terrified." Timothy looked at her in surprise. "You? But you're a captain." Karen chuckled. "Yeah, but that doesn't mean I wasn't scared. I almost quit during my first year of training." Timothy's eyes widened. "Why?" Karen hesitated. "Because I didn't think I was good enough." Timothy frowned. "But you are good enough." Karen studied him, realizing how easily he had flipped the situation around. She had been trying to encourage him, but somehow he was the one reassuring her. Maybe, she thought, she had more to learn from this boy than he did from her. The weeks turned into months, and something unexpected happened. Karen stopped seeing Timothy as a burden. She stopped seeing him as an obligation, or a punishment, or a lesson she had been forced to learn. She started seeing him as a student. No, as a pilot. One day, as they walked through the terminal after a lesson, Karen glanced down at him. "Do you really think you'll be a pilot one day?" Timothy grinned. "I don't think." "I know." Karen smirked. "Well, I guess I'd better make sure you don't embarrass me when that day comes." Timothy laughed. "I won't. I promise." For the first time in years, Karen Williams believed in someone else's dream just as much as they did. And that terrified her. Karen Williams never thought she would care. She had spent her entire career keeping emotions locked away, focusing on the precision of aviation, the rigidity of protocols, and the discipline that came with being a captain. She prided herself on not letting anything get too personal. And yet here she was, standing outside the Flight Academy's observation deck, watching an 8-year-old boy with a grin wider than the horizon, his fingers flying across the simulator controls like he had been born in the cockpit. She had spent the last 6 months mentoring Timothy Miller, a child she had once deemed nothing more than an intrusion. But now, he was becoming something else entirely, a legacy. His mother had dreamed of flying. His father was one of the most powerful men in aviation, and Timothy himself had a passion so strong that Karen couldn't deny it. She hated to admit it, but she had grown attached. And that scared her. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You're staring." Karen turned to find Robert Miller standing beside her, arms crossed as he watched his son maneuver the simulated plane. "I was observing," Karen corrected. Robert smirked. "Is that what you call it?" Karen sighed, turning back to the glass. "He's getting good. He's more than good." Robert's voice was filled with pride. "He's exceptional." Karen nodded. "You ever consider sending him to flight school when he's older?" Robert gave her a sideways glance. "I don't think there's a consider about it. It's inevitable." Karen hesitated. She knew that Robert had been against Timothy becoming a pilot for years, not because he didn't believe in him, but because he feared the dangers of the job. She had seen the way he tensed whenever Timothy spoke about flying. But something had changed, and Karen had a feeling she knew what. "You're trusting him more," she said. Robert exhaled. "I'm learning to." Karen watched as Timothy successfully landed the plane in the simulator, throwing his arms up in triumph. The pride in Robert's eyes was unmistakable. Karen knew then that this wasn't just about Timothy's dream anymore. It was about his father's healing. But healing didn't come without scars. Later that evening, Karen found herself in a quiet corner of the airport, seated across from Robert in one of the executive lounges. It had been years since they had spoken like this, without tension, without bitterness, without walls. Robert leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You've changed." Karen raised an eyebrow. "I could say the same about you." He smirked. "Touché." A silence stretched between them before Robert finally spoke again. "Thank you." Karen frowned. "For what?" "For this." He gestured toward the training rooms, where Timothy was still immersed in flight lessons. "For him." Karen shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't used to gratitude. "I was hard on him," she admitted. "At first." Robert nodded. "I know." Karen exhaled. "I didn't think he belonged." Robert studied her carefully. "And now?" Karen hesitated. "Now I think, maybe he belongs here more than anyone." Robert's expression softened. "I used to worry that I was pushing him too much, that he only wanted to fly because of Sarah." Karen nodded. "It's more than that. He loves this. It's in him." Robert sighed. "Then I guess I have no choice but to let him soar." Karen smirked. "Isn't that what parents are supposed to do?" Robert chuckled. "Since when do you care about parenting advice?" Karen hesitated. "I don't know." And for the first time, she realized she meant it. She didn't know when she started caring about Timothy. She didn't know when her annoyance had turned into admiration. All she knew was that she wasn't the same person she had been 6 months ago. And maybe, just maybe, that was a good thing. The next day, Timothy ran up to her, excitement brimming in his eyes. "Captain Williams, guess what?" Karen raised an eyebrow. "What?" "My dad signed me up for the junior aviation program. I start next year." Karen felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. "That's big news, kid." Timothy grinned. "Does this mean you'll still teach me?" Karen paused. She had never planned on sticking around. Her contract with Horizon Airlines was solid, but her personal plans had always been fluid. She had spent her career hopping between opportunities, never staying in one place for too long. But now, she looked at Timothy, his eyes filled with hope, with trust, with belief. She sighed. "Yeah, kid, I'll be here." Timothy's smile could have lit up the entire airport, and for the first time in her career, Karen Williams knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Timothy Miller stood at the edge of the runway, the cool evening breeze ruffling his neatly pressed shirt. His small fingers clutched the polished pilot wings pinned to his chest, a symbol of everything he had worked toward, of the promise he had made to his mother. He had spent the last several months learning, growing, proving to everyone, including himself, that he belonged in the world of aviation. He had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, his heart pounded harder than he expected. Robert Miller knelt beside his son, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Nervous, Timothy turned to face his father. "A little." Robert smiled. "That's normal. But you've earned this, Tim. Every bit of it." Timothy looked down at the tarmac, where a small training aircraft sat waiting for him. It wasn't a commercial jet, not yet, but it was a start. Today, for the first time, he was going to fly. Not just in a simulator, not just as a passenger. He was going to take the controls and feel the sky pull them forward. And he wasn't doing it alone. Captain Karen Williams adjusted her aviator sunglasses as she approached, a look of approval in her usually sharp gaze. "You ready, cadet?" Timothy swallowed and nodded. "Yes, Mom." Karen smirked. "We'll see about that once you're up there." They walked toward the aircraft together, and as Timothy climbed inside, he took a deep breath. Karen settled into the co-pilot seat beside him, her voice steady and calm. "All right, first things first, pre-flight checks." Timothy nodded, running through the familiar motions, his fingers moving confidently over the switches and gauges. He had practiced this 100 times in the simulator, but now everything felt more real, more immediate. Karen watched him carefully, her expression unreadable. "Good. Now take a breath. You're in control, but I'm right here." Timothy exhaled slowly. "Okay." As the engine roared to life, a thrill ran through him. Karen radioed the tower. "Tower, this is Horizon Training Flight, requesting clearance for takeoff." The response crackled back. "Cleared for takeoff. Horizon Training Flight. Winds are light. Have a good flight." Karen turned to Timothy. "All right, kid. Let's get this bird in the air." Timothy wrapped his hands around the yoke, his pulse hammering. He pushed forward on the throttle, and the plane began to roll down the runway. Faster, faster. The hum of the engine vibrated through his bones. The runway blurred beneath them. "Pull up," Karen instructed. Timothy tugged gently, and suddenly, they were airborne. The wheels left the ground. The earth fell away beneath them. The sky opened up, vast and endless. Timothy's breath caught in his throat. He was flying. Karen let out a low whistle. Not bad for a rookie. Timothy grinned, barely able to believe it. He looked down at the world below. Tiny houses, winding roads, the shimmering airport runways that had once felt so massive to him. His heart swelled. Somewhere, he knew, his mother was watching. Robert stood by the observation deck, his hands clasped in front of him as he watched his son soar. He wasn't sure he had ever been prouder. Beside him, Tanya Reynolds from Human Resources smiled. "He's going to be incredible, you know." Robert exhaled. "He already is." Tanya gave him a knowing look. "And Karen?" Robert chuckled. "She's changed." "She has," Tanya agreed. "And so have you." Robert didn't argue. He had spent so many years protecting Timothy, shielding him from the risks of aviation, from the pain of losing people in the skies. But in the process, he had forgotten that flying wasn't just about risk. It was about freedom. Timothy had found his wings. And somehow, in the middle of it all, Karen had found hers too. As Timothy brought the plane in for landing, Karen watched him carefully. "All right, keep her steady. Watch your descent." Timothy nodded, hands firm on the yoke. The ground rushed up to meet them. For a brief second, doubt flickered in his mind. What if he messed up? What if he crashed? Karen's voice broke through. "Trust yourself, Tim." And he did. With a gentle touch, the wheels kissed the runway. The plane slowed, came to a smooth stop. Karen leaned back, an approving smile playing at her lips. Textbook landing. Timothy beamed. "Really?" Karen smirked. "I've seen worse." As they taxied back to the hangar, Timothy could already feel the pull of the skies, the need to be up there again. When they climbed out, Robert was waiting, pride shining in his eyes. Timothy ran straight into his father's arms. "I did it, Dad." Robert hugged him tight. "You sure did." Karen watched the scene unfold, something shifting deep in her chest. She had spent years keeping people at a distance, but now, standing here, watching Timothy take his first step toward his future, she realized something. She didn't regret any of it. Robert turned to her. "You staying in town?" Karen hesitated. For so long, she had been a wanderer, chasing promotions, chasing control, chasing something she could never quite name. But here, at this small airport, with this boy who reminded her of why she had fallen in love with flying in the first place, she had found something she hadn't even realized she was searching for. Home. She nodded. "Yeah, I think I will." Robert smiled. "Good." Timothy looked between them, his grin wide. "Does this mean I get to keep flying with Captain Williams?" Karen chuckled. "We'll see, kid. We'll see." Timothy's laughter filled the air, mingling with the hum of the planes in the background. For the first time, in a long time, everything felt exactly right.